Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today we are going to be going over tire wear and how you can get more grip out of your tires and make them last longer. Everyone's car is set up differently to utilize your tires the best that you can. Some people like your car slammed on the ground. Some people like them lifted up a little bit with more toe in, more toe out. Every setup is going to wear your tires differently, whether they're in the front or in the rear. But everybody does like to get the most out of every tire you use on track. Tires are very expensive. They are probably one of the highest dollars spent in drifting. Last year I made some adjustments to the rear suspension of the Miata to be able to take camber out of the rear suspension. That helped level out the tire on the ground to get a lot more contact patch touching the ground or the track, and utilizing as much tire as I can and getting as much grip out of the tire as I can. Now that I'm switching and running a little bit bigger of a tire, it's a 225 instead of a 205, I am running into a little bit different issue with tire shoulder rolling over, and I'm chewing off one side of the tire rather than the other. Now each track layout does make a big difference on how your tire is wearing as well. For example, if you have two left-hand corners and maybe two smaller right-hand corners, your tires are going to wear off differently on one side of the tire than the other. Now, if they're very long left-hand corners, the outside of your passenger driver tire is going to wear faster than the inside of that tire, and vice versa on your driver's side. The inside edge is going to wear faster than the outside. So we will go over the Drifting the Plains 1 layout real quick. It was a pretty simple layout, similar to, say, Spring Matsuri or the Driftoberfest layout. It is kind of like a peanut shape. So you'd start over on this edge, you have 3 initiation cones. You have to be sideways and on throttle by that third cone coming across through this power alley. You have to reset and transition to an inner clip on the inside coming through the main large sweeper right here. You take basically a mid-line out to a rear touch and go, and then you'd manji through and get your back tires through this square right in here. Then you would set yourself up with a little bit of an e-brake pull coming into this outer zone up through the scoreboard corner, transition back around for an inner clip to the finish line. Now, when we're talking tire wear with this layout, you are taking a very long left-hand corner, which is going to wear out the passenger outside of the tire or have more weight on the passenger rear tire. When you come through the manji, you're not actually sitting on the driver's side rear tire for very long before you're already transitioning back onto that passenger rear tire for this, again, very long corner through the scoreboard corner. It's an outer zone, so you're on throttle, really digging into that passenger rear tire, and then you transition real quick here to an inner clip. You're not really sitting on that driver's side rear tire for very long once again, and then you're through the finish line. So you got 2 really long left-hand corners that really put a lot of stress and wear on that passenger rear. That being said, depending on the air pressure you have in your rear tires, if you run a little bit lower, you're going to get a little bit of sidewall roll coming through this corner and through this corner, so you might wear out the outer edge of that tire or the inner edge of your driver tire because you're dragging it along coming around that corner. Now I'll kind of touch base a little bit on rear alignment on my car. I believe I only am running about 1/8 of an inch toe in, which isn't super aggressive. It's only stock arms and everything in the back, but I do have 0 camber in the rear, and I think a little bit stiff of suspension in my opinion for right now, but it's because I'm running a little bit wider tire and I wanted to free it up a little bit. Now I do want to try and add a little bit more toe in the rear. Now why would you want to add toe in the rear? Adding toe in the rear suspension adds more forward drive out of a corner. So when you're coming out of a long sweeping corner and you let off the left foot brake or clutch kick or whatever, it's going to drive you forward instead of hanging you out wide in the corner. Now there is such thing as side bite as well. That has to do with your overall tire width and how far you have them pushed out. I don't really have a way to adjust that unless I put spacers or run a skinnier tire with lower offset. Right now, my car is where it is. This year, my main focus is mainly in chase. I can run a pretty decent lead line. It's just my chases are what's lacking. So when I'm coming out of a corner behind a car, I'm usually too far away and I can't really dive back into the pocket, so I need to make some adjustments. So to do that and to dive back into the pocket, you want to add more toe in so you have that drive out from behind them. So what I'm going to do first is throw my toe plates on in the rear just to confirm that I am at 1/8 of an inch toe in. Then we will see how much I can actually toe it in. You should be able to get at least 1/4 inch, if not 1/2 inch of toe in with stock arms on a Miata. We're trying to get a little bit more and we'll see how much we can get. To get the best performance out of your suspension and get the most grip and tire life out of your tires, it is best to set your ride height up to where your control arms are completely flat or just a little bit pitched down, so that when your suspension compresses, your tires are actually flat on the ground. All right, so looking underneath here, right now I don't have anything in the car, so it's just sitting level or pretty close. You can kind of see how flat it is compared to the ground. It's actually not as flat as you might think, so I'm going to throw a level on that so you guys can see what that looks like. I'll kind of throw right on the bottom. Now I don't know if you'll be able to see where that sits. Kind of bring you closer so you can see the bubble. It's not actually as level as I would like it to be, so I might make a couple adjustments. I just have to add a little bit of ride height to it to get that to drop down on the outside to be level. I mean, we're talking maybe 1/8 of an inch, which isn't very much. I actually want to go maybe just a little bit more than that so that I have a positive camber rather than negative. So right now it would technically be slightly negative camber. So if I can get that just a little bit positive, we'll get a little bit better squat and plant on the ground when the suspension compresses. Now hopefully these little drawings that I do and scribble on with whiteboard help you guys out just a little bit. So you have a lower control arm and an upper control arm, and you want that lower control arm basically flat and level with the ground when you start setting up your suspension, whether it be adding toe, ride height, whatever that may be. You want that lower control arm to be as flat and parallel to the ground as you can. You can add just a little bit of positive camber to that by extending your ride height or the length of your coilover, just so you have a little bit more of a pitch downward, so that when your suspension compresses, your tire should level out and flatten out on the ground to get a better contact patch, which gives you more grip and makes your car faster in the corner. So before we actually go and do anything with doing the toe, I'm actually going to lift up the car in the back just a smidge. It's not going to be very much, just to make sure those control arms are completely flat. After having these coilovers in the car, they may be a little bit fatigued and they could have squatted or relaxed a little bit. So we're just going to extend them up just a little bit, just to make sure that we have that rear suspension set up as best as we can. We just have stock arms, so I'm trying to utilize as much as I can out of stock arms before upgrading to anything else. All right, we are looking at the suspension or the coilover underneath the car. It's pretty dirty in here. If you don't have like coilover covers, make sure you take like a wire brush and brush out your threads so that when you're moving these collars, you're not scooping dirt into the threads and wrecking the threads. Now I haven't really made any adjustments to my coilover in quite a while, so I made sure to clean up the threads really well, especially where I'm going to be moving on those threads. Now you take your wrenches, and there's a small one and a big one because you have two different size collars. We're going to break loose the bottom collar, but before we do that and before we change any of the height, we're going to measure up from the top hat up here down to this bottom collar, or maybe even to this collar, whichever spot, so you have at least a reference point, and make sure you measure the same way after you make adjustments so you know how far you actually moved. Now I already know that both the driver's side and passenger side were the same height up to the fender, so that shouldn't be an issue. I had everything measured out, everything was the same. So now whatever measurements I change it to over here, I just have to transfer that over to the passenger side. So we are going to take a measurement before we end up moving anything so that we have a starting point. We're going to measure from the top hat down to probably the top of this collar, which I have about 8 5/8 of an inch. So we are going to increase that number, so the distance between the top hat and this collar will maybe go to about 8 3/4. So that's going to raise it up about 1/8 of an inch measurement on the coilover. Now, if you only change the measurement on the coilover 1/8 of an inch, it could actually change your overall ride height from, say, the ground to the top of your fender by almost 1/4 of an inch. So we're going to have to maybe go a couple of times on this and make sure that it's actually moving how I want, and check the level of the control arm on the bottom. All right, I got the preload set on this side. I got the ride height set where I want for right now. Now I'm going to go and match the other side, drop this on the ground, and then show you guys what that control arm looks like compared to the ground, and with my little bullet level real quick, and then we'll go from there. In theory, it should technically be positive camber right now by just a little bit, so then when I can soften up the damper in the trunk, it should hopefully squat better and have a better contact patch. Now when we look underneath the car and check kind of how it levels at the same point, we're actually now a little bit past level, which I was saying I wanted to be. So it's about that like 1/16 of an inch or so past level, which is perfect where we want it. So it's just leaning off of that just a little bit. Now that the ride height is where we want it and the preload is where we want it, now we can check the toe and make sure that we're actually towed in, and hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit more toe in for that forward drive we're looking for. We got the toe plate here. We got 67 1/16 in the back and 66 15/16 in the front, which equates to 1/8 of an inch toe in the rear. We want to go probably at least to 1/4 of an inch toe in, if not a little more, if we can squeeze it out of the stock arms. Now if we look, that's one eccentric bolt, that is the back side of the control arm, and then the other one for the front side. Now if you look at that versus that one, and vice versa on the inside edge, really hard to see that, none of those little pivot pieces match. They're all kind of out of whack. So I don't know why that is. I'm gonna look into that. Before I move any of that, I'm going to take a paint marker and mark where those are located so that I can pull at least one of those out and try and see why they're mismatched, because those little oval pieces should be lined up pretty much together and pointed the same direction. One might be pointed up and one is pointed at the side right now. That doesn't seem right. The front alignment and the eccentric bolts, those match. They're like front and back of the control arm. They all are lined up the same way. So that's a little concerning to me as to why they're kind of twisted out of whack. So I'm gonna try and see what's going on with that. So what you'll need for Miata alignment stuff in the back is a 17mm socket and a 17mm wrench. So I have the nut all the way off the back side of the control arm. Now I believe that if I remember correctly, the back eccentric bolt adjusts your camber by a little bit. So this not only pushes it forward, but it also pushes the control arm out. I don't know if you guys will be able to see it actually move. I can see it move. It's pretty difficult on the camera. So it was, I want to say, cambered in as much as it could on the backside. I never did that. That was the last time I had it on an alignment rack. I haven't really messed with the rear suspension very much, other than like the coilover and the sway bar back here and the upper. So basically what we have to do, or what I can do, is like camber it out on the bottom. So that'll either bring me back to a 0 or a negative camber, and then I'll maybe have to play with the ride height a little bit to take that back out. After a little bit of investigation, I got some adjustment out of it. The front eccentric bolt, I can't move anymore. I can't tow it in at all or any further with the current eccentric bolt setup. It is maxed out on the front, but on the back, I can basically add like negative camber back into it, which pushes the back side of the tire out, which in turn would actually, you know, add a little bit of toe in. But now I'm gonna have to do the same thing to the other side, put the wheel back on, drop it down, take measurements again with the carpenter square to see where I am with camber, because if it cambers it out in the, like on the bottom, then I need to add a little bit more ride height to take that camber back out of it. Hopefully I get a little bit of toe in gain by doing that. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to work, but it's just an experiment. We'll try it out. If it does work, I have marks on the eccentric bolts, and if it doesn't work, I can take them back to where they originally were. So we'll give that a try. I'll match it on the other side real quick, and then we'll drop it down and take some measurements. We got the wheels back on. We're just going to do a quick camber check. Right now it actually looks like we're still positive camber by about 1/8 of an inch, which is perfect. I thought it was going to move a lot more than it did, and that wasn't very much, so that's good. Let's check the other side. We got good news. The passenger side is about the same, with a little bit of a gap down there, which means we are still positive camber by just a sliver. Now let's check the toe in or toe out and see where we're at. I'm not entirely sure how much it would have moved this based on the small adjustment on the back side there. Oh geez, okay, that moved it a lot more than I thought it was going to. So we are at about 67 3/16 on the back side. We're at 66 3/4 on the front. So that means we are almost a 1/2 inch toe in right now in the front. I think I'm actually gonna leave it right there. So I would say that's pretty decent. I think I'm gonna leave it there. It's like 7/16 or almost a 1/2 inch of toe in the rear. As long as it's straight and even, I moved it the same on both sides, so it should still be square and drive pretty straight. If it doesn't for some reason, I have the paint marks on the eccentric bolts and where I can put it back. Now hopefully the changes that I made actually benefit in the ways that I am looking for it to benefit. When you add toe in, it should technically tip your chasing tire or the trailing rear tire in towards the corner to push you farther into the corner, and then the opposite, the main tire that has all of the weight on it, should push you out of the corner. So really you're gaining side bite and forward bite with a toe in setup. I don't know for sure if it's going to benefit this chassis. It could, and I hope it does. Now that I have a little bit of positive camber and a 1/2 inch toe in, I think it's going to be a little bit faster in the chase. That's the whole goal, is to be faster and closer to the lead driver in the chase, because that's where I have been lacking the most. So we'll leave it where it is. I'll get the wheel torque down and everything. I don't think I really need to take it for a cruise or anything, because everything is basically going to drive the same. The only way you're going to actually notice a difference is drifting, and drifting with another vehicle. Well, I believe I accomplished what I set out to accomplish in getting a little bit more toe in the rear and getting a little bit more positive camber as well. Hopefully that should level out a little bit better on tire wear and hopefully get a little bit more grip into the car as well to help me drive out of corners in the chase to dive back in after transition. We won't be able to test that until we get to the track the next time. It'll just be a couple of weeks and we'll be able to throw down a little bit more at Drifting the Plains 2. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.